It's been one long year since COVID-19 disrupted all of our lives and blew up the notion that to put in a full day of work, we had to leave the house. Working remotely and now the beginnings of bringing employees back to the office present a host of challenges to the human resources community. Good morning and welcome. I'm Mike Reith, publisher of Delaware Business Times. On behalf of our team and the Small Business Development Center, we're glad that you're able to join us for this, our first program of 2021. Today's conversation, top 10 HR mistakes to avoid in 2021, couldn't come at a better time, as many of us look for guidance on managing a workforce that's off-site, under stress, and potentially looking to return to the office. I'd like to thank our sponsors of the 2021 SBDC series, including Artisans Bank, BNY Mellon, Comcast Business, Harvey Hanna and Associates, and the Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce. Their support is greatly appreciated and makes this presentation possible. Thank you again for attending this morning. I'd like to turn things over to Kevin Warsh from BNY Mellon Wealth Management in Greenville. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending what promises to be a very, very interesting event. I'd just like to take a minute to say thanks, and the Bank of New York Mellon, the Wealth Management Group here in Greenville, Delaware, is dedicated to a couple of key things in Delaware, and that is business and helping business owners and families be successful. So if we'd be happy to have a conversation with anybody, if you're looking for advice along those areas. I'd like to take a second and introduce the Small Business Development Center and Margot Rain. Margot, go ahead.
Oh, there I am. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you to BNY Mellon, one of our long-term sponsors of this program, and also to Artisans Bank, Comcast Business, Harvey Hanna Associates, and the Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our first 2021 program. The world has changed a lot in the last year, and it's had a real impact on human resources. So we wanted to bring you a program for some of the most important things to take into consideration for the coming year. We are using a new program format today, so we're all getting used to that. There is a chat function in there, so please feel free to put your questions in. We've got a lot of backstage help with us monitoring those questions. So we look forward to some interaction. We're trying to make this a little more interactive than things have been in the past. We've assembled a great panel of speakers, and I would like to introduce them to you now. Maria Clyde is a certified professional in human resources, and at the Society of Human Resources, she's a senior certified professional. She has more than 10 years of human resources consulting experience and joined B+H Insurance in late 2016. Maria handles human resources for the agency and assists their clients on their in-house HR needs. Catherine Witherspoon Fry has provided her clients with robust representation in matters of employment and related business law. Catherine represents and counsels employers and executives in all facets of the employment relationship, including hiring, termination, discrimination, non-competition, Fair Labor Standards Act matters, issues regarding family and medical leave and other leaves, and whistleblower complaints and regulatory matters. And finally, Dr. Mandel Much is a licensed psychologist with over 35 years of experience in providing direct clinical services, supervision and training, program management and administration, and human resources management. He's been a consultant for a wide variety of organizations, businesses, schools, and state and federal governments to maximize human resources to maintain the mental health well-being of employees and organizations. So thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. And we're going to just jump right in. So the first question I have is for Catherine. And I should let you know, audience, that each of these 10 tips is going to be showing up in the chat function. So if you don't catch my question, you'll see it in the chat. You can just copy and paste it into your notes if you like. Catherine, failing to institute a COVID-19 policy concerning COVID issues such as leaves, return to work, and telecommuting. That's our first tip. What do you have to tell us about that?
So I've been doing a lot of that work this year for my firm, Oppert Carmen. I'm a partner, and so I have a lot of clients that are dealing with that issue, of course. So many people need to think seriously about what liability they are exposed to regarding to COVID-19. There are just so many aspects, right? Are your customers going to sue you when they come into your place of business and they get sick, or allegedly, right? Are your employees going to sue you because they got sick at work, allegedly? This has happened with Amazon. This has happened with Walmart. This has happened to some big players. And we want to make sure that you're protected and that you have the policies in place to make sure that people are not sick and coming to work and making other people sick. It also is super important, putting aside the liability issue, super important to protect public health. And the sooner we do this, the better the pandemic goes for us, right? The sooner we do this, the better it ends, the sooner it ends. And then finally, we want to make sure that that your company is not the HR nightmare, even if you're not sued. The HR nightmare that is, hey, they let everybody get sick and don't anybody go down there, and then it kills your profits. You also want to have productivity in place. If you're missing your people, it might not be that it's not affordable, because you can pay them sick leave still under the current law. You can still pay them sick leave and take that as tax credit. But what about your productivity? What about if you need those people on site? I've got problems with some of my educational daycare type clients where they have to have people there, right? They have to have people present. It doesn't matter if they can afford to pay them not to be there. They need to be there. So the policies would deal with things like when you can return to work after you've been exposed, when you can return to work after you've been sick, and things of that nature. Telecommuting, what happens with telecommuting? What are you liable for with telecommuting? What do you need to tell your people to be careful about when they're telecommuting? It's just a whole new world with that, right? Sanitization, your distancing policies, your basics as far as cleanliness, all of that is covered. And very importantly, an acknowledgement that people sign off and say, yes, I've read this. Yes, I understand it. Yes, I will abide by it. Policies are very, very important to show that you are not the negligent employer who doesn't care and who isn't trying and who is oblivious to what's going on and just about money, right? You want to be the careful employer who, when they're sued, has that defense. We weren't negligent. We tried as hard as we could. This is what we did in the best interest of everyone.
Thank you, Catherine. That's very informative. Maria, our second tip is don't not periodically update your handbook. That sounds like
meaning do that.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So this is, I feel like anytime anyone thinks about human resources, they're always thinking about a handbook first and foremost. And it truly is your best line of defense. Catherine was speaking about, when claims come through and people try to sue you, employees try to sue you, your handbook is usually your best line of defense and all the documentation that goes in with that. Unfortunately, handbooks are a bear of a project to do. They're not our favorite things to do. Rewriting a handbook, you see people's eyes rolling every time they have to do it. It's like watching paint dry, which I totally understand. And that's probably part of the reason why people don't periodically update them. In my experience, best practices, and this is coming from SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, best practice is really to look at your handbook probably as frequently as every 6 months. If you can't do that, at least every year, because these policies are changing so quickly. And not only now do we have federal policies and federal laws to worry about, but there's state policies, and now there's local policies as well, and local laws that we have to be concerned about. So it's just extremely important to keep an eye on those things. For example, the city of Philadelphia, New York City, all have their own local laws in addition to state laws that we have to follow. So it's really, really important that we're periodically updating our handbook to implement those new policies required by federal, state, and local law changes. But also, when you think about it, how often do you, in everyday business and with your organizations, you had a policy and then you change it? Right? Okay, this isn't working for us anymore. If 2020 showed us anything, it was the fact that things were changing hourly. Clients would call me and say, okay, what do I do? And I'd say, okay, this is what I think we need to do right now. And then the next hour I would call them back and say, don't do that. and a lot of times that's happening in business. And what's really, really important is that our handbooks are living documents. In the past, we've wanted to, okay, we're done with this project. We want to print it out and we want to give everybody these actual handbooks, right? I think now more than ever, it's important that we make them digital. That way they are living documents. We can make the changes that we need to communicate with our employees to make these changes. And now we do have the ability with technology to digitally sign off on these. Of course, the employee has to agree to digitally sign off on it in order for the signature to be valid, for the acknowledgement to be properly signed. But it is just so, so important. And I think people overlook their handbooks and the importance it is to continuously update them, because it is a difficult thing to do. And it's a constant project, right? We're never done. It's like, oh, as soon as I finish my handbook, I have to update it again. But if you set a calendar reminder for yourself, maybe every 6 months, every year, we're going to look at it, then you make that commitment. And I think that's the best thing that you can do as an HR professional.
Thank you, Maria. That's good. I know I'm going to be telling my clients to begin doing that. So Mandel, the number 3 top HR mistake to avoid in 2021 is not looking for the common manifestations of stress in your employees due to COVID. So tell us what to look for.
Thank you, Margot. First of all, I'd like to apologize for not being as well presented as my colleagues here who took time to get fashionably dressed this morning. that's one of the consequences of a lot of remote work, being at home. So that being said, my experience as a psychologist and a small business owner, we are obviously in the healthcare profession. And when COVID hit, we were deemed necessary and essential healthcare providers. But we had over 90 employees. We had 4 locations, and we had over 650 patients, active patients at any given point in time. And we were 95% in clinic in person. And we had to transform to about 80% telehealth immediately in about a 2-month period. During that time, so just as a backdrop, our job is stressful in and of itself because we deal with substance abusing patients, children and adolescents and adults, and those with co-occurring major psychiatric disorders. So, when I was in graduate school, they said, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb really needs to want to change. And the same guy said, psychologists are the only people in the world who need 30 hours of therapy a week. So we tend to draw folks who have genuine empathy and concern for their fellow humans, but also folks who get in there because a lot of times of their own experiences related to dealing with family, friends who may have suffered from, mental illness or substance use disorders or both. So as a director, as a supervisor, and as an owner, we were always mindful of the stress created by the job itself. Once COVID hit, we had 80% of our workforce not coming into the office. And they were not coming into the office for a variety of reasons. Schools closing down, healthcare, childcare centers closing down, having elderly parents in their home. And these folks who otherwise were very high functioning, educated persons were now trying to juggle things that clearly disrupted their routines. At the same time, while we were obligated, both ethically, legally, and morally, to continue to provide service for our patients. So it's a quandary for us as an agency and for the individual therapists who had their own caseloads of how to do that effectively and, manage the increased stress associated with the increased demands and isolation and disconnect as a result of COVID. So the manifestations of stress that we saw were increased lability or, emotionality in people who were otherwise, able to handle the stress of their lives and their jobs. Irritability, increased irritability and frustration, and downright despair and hopelessness at times in terms of, how am I going to do all these things? And as the pandemic progressed, we saw more and more people getting less and less effective at being able to do their jobs. And that required an awful lot of intervention on our part in terms of support to the best we could. And we were able to not lay off anybody during the pandemic because of, PPP loan and sustaining and transforming very quickly to a, 80% telehealth practice that was a nearly 100% in-person practice. But that stress affected folks who did not have any underlying psychiatric or substance use problems, but it particularly affected those who had manageable, mild anxiety or mild dysphoria, who now all of a sudden, with the increased stress of the pandemic, were unable to really function at the level they were pre-pandemic. So, you look at work productivity, you look at the emotional changes in people, you hear there folks who were typically amiable and got along well with their coworkers in conference calls and Zoom meetings, getting more irritable and more distracted. And also productivity goes down. So, we had to measure productivity even in the transformation to telehealth. And, we could see that folks were not as productive. And part of that you can blame on the pandemic because you have to do everything via Zoom and telephone and FaceTime and all that. But, whereas if they were in the office, if somebody didn't show up for an appointment, or there would be a lot of, chasing them down and pursuit to try to keep people engaged, whereas people would make their one phone call after the scheduled session and, oh, I got a voicemail or nobody answered, and that would be it. So their energy and their enthusiasm and their commitment to being able to pursue their clients decreased dramatically. Now, I understand, many folks on this call, on this program, are not in my field, but I think the whether you're a 10-person employer or a 300-person employer, you're going to look for those signs I just mentioned, whether your employees are working remotely or sometime in the office or in the field.
Thank you, Mandel. That's a good list of things to keep an eye out for. So, Maria, changing slightly, the number 4 top 10 HR mistake to avoid in 2021 is not completing your Delaware required sexual harassment training or distributing your Delaware sexual harassment notice. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
Make sure we know about it at all.
Yeah. So it's hard to think of anything else but COVID. And I think that's in 2020, it just dominated everything. And then people forget that, oh yeah, we have these other compliance requirements that were before COVID, right? So there was this law that was passed effective January 1st, 2019 in the state of Delaware that required employers with 50 or more employees to do mandatory anti-sexual harassment training. Separate training for your employees, separate training for your supervisors. And I think a lot of people just kind of forgot about that. 2020 went by and here we are in 2021. And this is an every 2-year requirement, every other year requirement. So I think we forgot because 2020 kind of, as long as the year was, you look back and it almost, where did it go, right? It went by in a flash. And now, so if you completed your initial sexual harassment training in, let's say, January or February of 2019, all of a sudden now you're up for renewal, for retraining. A lot of folks, of course, there's been that question of whether or not to do this in person versus virtual. And that was in the beginning when the law was first passed in Delaware, because it had to be interactive, right? And what did interactive mean? And there is certainly a way to do this online, at least my interpretation of this, a way to do this online that it is interactive, or whether that's a virtual presentation. The biggest point of this is allowing people to ask questions, to engage in a very difficult topic. And that's really what interactive means. But the point is with all of this COVID in the news, people aren't even realizing, and here we are, March 11th already, first quarter's almost done, and we really need to start thinking about the logistics around our Delaware required sexual harassment retrain. Because if you are fully remote now, it's okay, how are we going to do this, still have it interactive with with my workforce. And maybe if, let's say it's a contractor or restaurant or these duties that can't be done over Zoom or telework, it's how are we logistically and safely going to complete our training this year to fulfill that requirement with all the other COVID obligations that we have. So I realize it's a difficult thing, but I'm saying let's start thinking about it now before in the blink of an eye, 2021 flies by as quickly as 2020 did. And then, of course, the second piece of this that I think people forget about, employers forget about, is that distributing that Delaware sexual harassment notice, which is a requirement. Every employer with at least 4 employees is required to distribute this notice. It can be found on the Delaware Department of Labor's website, right there on the home screen. I think it's the bottom left-hand corner. They have a list of links of PDFs that you can download. They have it in English and in Spanish, and it's our job as employers to distribute this notice to every single employee and then every new employee upon hire. And then, of course, with the training is keeping up with all of our new hires, because technically we're supposed to train any new hires within a year of employment. You can wait until they've been with you for 6 months, but they need to be trained within a year of employment. So there really is this ongoing training effort that, again, we need to be tracking, and we need to be diligent about that, whether that's creating a calendar reminder for yourself and making sure that in the midst of all of the chaos that we're experiencing with COVID, that we're not forgetting all of our other requirements, compliance requirements as well.
Thanks, Maria. That's really informative. One quick question from me. I know you said the law said it's mandatory for employers with 50 or more employees. Am I correct in saying you'd recommend that people have this no matter how many employees they have?
Yes, it's best.
I get lots of nodding heads.
It's best practice. I think in the beginning it was, if you were under 50 employees, people would just say, nope, I'm not even going to worry about this because of the cost associated with it, maybe, but really the cost is such a minimal thing in comparison to what this could turn into and for your organization. The cost of a claim like this, legal fees, morale, productivity, reputation, all of that is far greater than the cost to take the time and to do this. And I think everything that you saw happening in the last couple of years with the Me Too movement and this Harvey Weinstein and all Matt Lauer and all of these instances that happened in the workplace, this was coming to the forefront, and we need to have a conversation about this. We need to educate our employees about this. And in addition to sexual harassment is only one type of harassment. You have all of the other types of harassment that's discrimination based. And I really think in addition to, yes, every employer should commit to doing this training, don't just do the state requirement, which is just sexual harassment training. I really think that you need to consider educating your employees about what discrimination is and, discrimination against people of other protected categories, not just based on sex.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's really great information. Okay, my next tip is from Catherine. So the number 5 tip of top HR mistakes to avoid in 2021 is failing to draft or update your non-disclosure, non-solicitation, and non-competition agreements.
That might sound like a lot. I get that. A lot of people maybe haven't thought too much about this subject. Before I talk about it, I just want to reiterate what Maria said. I completely agree with her. People have to be very, very careful about making sure people understand what's discriminatory, what's harassment. I agree, it's really important to do that often. I've always recommended that. I've been in this field for 26 years, and harassment nothing surprises me. When Weinstein came out, when all this happened, oh yeah, well, what else is new? This has been going on forever. And we need to just keep paying attention to it, as well as other forms of harassment. I couldn't agree more. And I agree with have your policy handbook reviewed once a year. I agree with that. That's very smart. Delaware in particular, it's constantly changing the laws. Every single session, there's something new. Absolutely. I sit on a committee that sort of is in charge of looking at these things. And boy, you had no idea how busy we are. It's just crazy. So anyway, I digress. I just wanted to reiterate what Maria said. I completely agree. It's extremely expensive when you get into these things. I had a case go to the United States Supreme Court on disability discrimination. Okay. It was insane. It took 7 years between when the person was let go and our decision from the Supreme Court. So just saying. So moving on, the next tip, the non-competition, non-solicitation, I would also throw in their non-disparagement clauses are really, really important. Some of them can be, in a way, incorporated into one's handbook. Meaning, put out there what's confidential. Put out there what you think should never be shared. And then make moves to protect it. Be very certain that if you're going to say that something is a trade secret, that it's actually protected. Meaning password protected, kept under lock and key, not shared with every single employee, sort of a need to know basis. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to say, so-and-so stole my trade secrets. Well, you didn't treat it as a trade secret. So I would say in handbooks, it would be a good idea to set that out, or just give every person that you hire a non-disclosure agreement, especially in the medical profession, certain professions that have highly sensitive information, maybe the legal profession, for instance, would be highly advised to just do that for everybody. It's just it is a restrictive covenant, but it's something that's easily applicable to everyone and enforceable against everyone. You don't want your receptionist taking this stuff any more than you want your president taking this stuff. So I would highly recommend that. And then if you do have non-solicitation agreements with some of your executives, then you want to look at them, update them, and make sure they're enforceable. That is another rapidly changing area of law. Several states recently have made big legislative moves on this front. In Virginia, for instance, you can't write a non-compete for anyone who makes less than about $60,000 a year. That's a lot of people who you just can't. They're not enforceable. Same with DC. DC has gone even further, and this comes into being this year. It is no non-competes are enforceable, period. None. So Delaware is quite protective as well and precise about what's going to be enforced and what isn't going to be enforced. Are you going to be able to say, you cannot take my customers for 2 years? You cannot take prospective customers for 2 years, people that we've pitched to. Are you going to be able to say, you can't take our employees for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Are you going to be able to enforce non-competitions, which say you can't go into a competing business, you can't own part of a competing business, you can't start your competing business, you can't work for a competing business? Well, what's enforceable? Is that all through the United States? Is that all over the world? Is that within 25 miles of any location your company has? What is it? What's enforceable? And if these are very important to you because you are in one of these highly sensitive fields like high tech or I just name many fields, but that's just an example. If you're in one of those fields where this is highly sensitive and you're very concerned about people leaving and starting competing businesses and taking your customers with them, particularly like really good high sales, highly regarded, highly producing salespeople, you need to look at this. You need to make sure they're up to date. What good is a piece of paper that isn't enforceable? None, right? So you spent, $1 zillion on a lawyer like 7 years ago to write something great. It may not be any good. So that's what I would say. A big mistake, a big HR mistake this year or any year would be not to have those things looked at on a periodic basis, almost like a handbook. It's very good.
Thank you, Catherine. Mandel, our sixth HR tip to avoid, things to avoid is failing to develop federally and state compliant methods to identify, intervene, and support employees who are under increased stress from the pandemic. So how do we do a better job of identifying that?
Well, it's kind of a follow-up from my the first response, but I really do want to echo what Catherine and Maria have said about employee handbooks, mandatory sexual harassment training, and other trainings that I will talk about in my third point that have to do with culture and sensitivity, diversity and inclusion along a broad spectrum of the workforce now that we encounter. But you know, there are folks in different kinds of businesses who, you know, I believe, Catherine, if I'm not correct, tell me, but Delaware is still a fire at will state.
Right, correct.
Right. So you really don't need a reason to discharge somebody. You can just say we have no longer have a need for your service. But while I'm saying that the federally and state compliant methods, that these laws are changing, you know, the Family Medical Leave Act and the I forget the acronym for the COVID leave. I believe that if you aren't, even though we're still fire at will, if we're doing it because we're targeting folks that are absent or underproductive and they fall into that category of FMLA or the COVID relief package, you can get in serious trouble for that. So when we talk about employees who are under increased stress from the pandemic, I think it really falls to leadership to create a culture that trains its mid-level management, its upper management, all the way down to understand that we want to create psychologically healthy workplaces. And by doing so, we want people to feel accepted. We want people to feel valued. We want people to be able to, if they're underproducing, be dealt with in a respectful and clear way, that unless their acts are egregious or repetitive, to understand that, you know, as an employer of any size, that, you know, we are in a position to try to support and improve your performance, because honestly, having hired and lost hundreds of employees over the year, every time you bring on a new employee, you end up paying them more money than you paid the employee who just left. And it takes a good year to train them to get back to the level of productivity who the person who just, you know, left on their own because they sought a different job. So if we have employees who can benefit from efforts at leadership and management to do, and I would recommend, and I'm doing this right now with some police departments and some not-for-profits and the Department of Corrections, we're doing group trainings, wellness trainings, like how to take care of yourself, how to identify if you are under increased stress, whether you recognize it or not, how it may manifest. And I'm doing this separately with management and ownership and with employees. And the good thing is we found a number of folks who are interested in this as a result of the pandemic, but also as a result of all these other issues that Catherine and Maria brought up before about sexual harassment and discrimination and making sure your handbook's up to date. It sets the groundwork for when an employee is feeling either increased stress that may be pandemic related or may be work related. It may be discrimination. It may be bullying. It may be a hostile work environment. It may be, you know, something that's internal, something that's external, or some combination of two. And we want to give folks a forum to be able to air these things in a way that will not cause some sort of unexpected consequence from the employer. Now, if it's warranted, it's warranted, but in many of these cases, they can be resolved through education, training, and support. So I would recommend that, both on a management, ownership, leadership level and an employee level, that you consider either through your own HR departments or, with the help of some, outside consultants, bring in and do these webinars on, we're going to have to do it all in webinars. We're going to have to do sexual harassment in webinar. We're going to have to do, cultural competency. We're going to have to do sensitivity and inclusion. We're going to have to do everything right now, it looks like, in a webinar form, but that's what I would recommend at this point in time.
If I may, I just wanted to elaborate, Mandel, on what you mentioned about Delaware being an at-will state, because I get that question from clients a lot. Well, I'm just going to terminate this person because I can, and it's an at-will state. Yes, but it cannot be an undercover reason of that it is for an illegal reason. I.e., not even, i.e. the employee is a member of a protected category, or it's that we don't even want to go through the reasonable accommodation process under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. We could do an entire seminar. I'm sure, Catherine, we could do an entire seminar on ADA and reasonable accommodation and how that's really come to the forefront in COVID times. But I caution folks who say, I'm going to exercise my at-will right because this is Delaware. It is a lot more that goes into that.
I agree. It's a sticky wicket. You really have to be careful with that because especially if, the underlying reason is, not just because we don't need your position anymore. There's something behind it, because that person will go seek legal counsel and you'll be sued. It happens.
And that's often I find when it's not working out at will, we're going to let you go, and you don't give them a reason. And then that's when they make up their own.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, Catherine, tip number 7, failing to address issues surrounding telecommuting employees. This would include, but not be limited to, withholding taxes if they're now working from someplace other than near where they worked before.
Right. There are a lot of things to consider about remote working employees that just didn't come up before because most people didn't have a telecommuting workforce. They might have 1 or 2 people that did it. It wasn't a big deal in their company. They may not have had any policy at all. So my COVID-19 policy addendum to a handbook includes information about telecommuting. What should a policy look like, right? So that is a super important consideration. You need to have a policy. It needs to say things like, you've got to check your working environment for hazards, potential hazards, right? I have a checklist, and I will have, my clients use this checklist and say, okay, let's make sure there aren't any tripping hazards, for instance, because people are liable to get injured at home, maybe even more than they are at work. I mean, who knows? And employers have to cover that. It's workers' comp. Okay, so someone can still collect workers' comp for something that happened at home. It still can be considered a compensable injury. Famous story about woman getting up to get a refill on her coffee at home and tripping over her dog, and that being compensable. That is actually true. That is not a Delaware case, but that was a true case. She was on the clock. And so that's another consideration you need to make when you're thinking about telecommuting employees. When are they on the clock? Make sure you set certain hours and make sure that people understand about clocking in and out. That timekeeping is a definite consideration for people working at home, as far as the ones who are not exempt. And then, yes, turning to the fact that everyone has to think about the fact that their people might be working in different states. Now they're sitting with their butt in a chair in Pennsylvania, right over the line from Delaware, when in fact they'd been working in Delaware for a very long time, right? So you have to think about where are the taxes withheld, from what state, what's appropriate. And sometimes you have to go into this analysis of, well, how much time do they spend in each state and that whole thing. But if you're telecommuting exclusively or almost exclusively, then it's going to be the state of where the person is sitting in a chair. And that's also going to be dictating what laws apply to the person's employment relationship with your company. So it's very important. I have clients who have, offices in 30 states. And I'll say, okay, but where are the people sitting? Oh, okay. Well, then now we have 50 states because we have people, well, like they'll say, well, we have 48 states because nobody's in Hawaii or Alaska. Okay. So, you have this policy. So can you keep in mind that I'm going to need to do an addendum to your policy handbooks, which apply to all the different states in which you have people working? Because if they're sitting in Pennsylvania and your company is technically located in New Jersey, it's not New Jersey law. It's Pennsylvania law. In fact, it gets even more specific because what if you're in Philadelphia? Boy, there are a lot of employment laws in Philadelphia. How about if you're in New York City? There's a ton going on. So people just need to be very cognizant of where their employees are and making sure that those laws are going to be applicable to that employment relationship, including the taxation stuff. So that is a big mistake, not to consider your telecommuting policies and what needs to be done. I might tack on, which kind of goes with some things that Maria and Mandel were saying, that you need to make reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities at home. They might need reasonable accommodations to their work schedule or to their working conditions at home. And that's on you, you as the employer. If someone comes to you and says, I need accommodations, I have this disability, you have the duty to engage in that interactive process and make sure that they are getting them, even if they're at home. So, the whole firing under cover of at will, goes to that too. It's, well, this is too much trouble to accommodate this person. You have to think, is it really at will? Are you really getting rid of them because they have a difficult personality, or is it because they actually have a disability? And maybe they're asking for too many things and you don't want to go through it. Maybe it's because they have a hidden disability that you don't even perceive as an employer. Maybe they're suffer from anxiety disorder. Maybe they have a learning disability. You have to think about these things when you're making accommodation, and the same things could apply at home as apply in the office.
That's intimidating.
Yeah, it can be a lot of work. It's a lot.
I almost feel like if you're, renting vacation homes at Rehoboth, you need to give the tenants who are there now little disclosures on employment laws in Delaware. Yikes. Okay, Maria, tip number 8. So, tip number 8 is not training your managers or employees on communication and soft skills using DISC assessments. You want to tell us a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely. I love DISC assessments. I'm a huge proponent of them. I use them with my clients, and they're personality assessments. So if you've done Myers-Briggs or things of that sort, it really, what it measures is behavior and communication style, which is a super important part of your job, right? You have your hard skills and your capabilities, how well you are performing in your job. But then you have your soft skills. And I often find that we don't focus enough on people's soft skill development. They may be amazing at their job, but they're not great to work with, right? Maybe they have a bad attitude. Like, let's get to the root of why their communication style is maybe combative or doesn't complement well. You ever have either 2 or 3 employees who just don't seem to get along? that's what DISC assessments is for. And it's because you can have your folks take these assessments and be able to see this and look, oh, wow, this person is a high driver. This person is a high steady influencer, is the people person, and the high C is your real data driven, detail oriented person. And I think this stuff really, really came to light, especially with 2020 and COVID and people being under a tremendous amount of stress. If you go back to what Mandel said earlier about, you see people who were normally worked very well, never had any issues, you never knew anything was going on, and then bam, they're under a lot of pressure, they're hit with a lot of stress, and then they just, it's hard. It's hard for them to perform. They're not communicating well. They're snapping. They're short. They're impatient with people. You can tell with DISC assessments how people are going to operate under stress, with fear, how they show their fears, what they're motivated by, all with using these assessments. And I think that all of this stuff really, really ties together. A lot of DISC assessments that are out there maybe only focus on the behavioral and communication style. The type of assessment that I use also goes a step further into the underlying motivators, or what's called driving forces as well. And I think that is really, really important, because you'll find when you take a look at these things, the two people who may or may not get along very well may be motivated by two completely different things, and they can't get on the same sheet of music, right? They can't get there. And I think we're really seeing the importance of learning and being more self-aware about our soft skills and the way we communicate in times like 2020, when we're all under a tremendous amount of pressure. It's a great investment for your company and your team to do these. Have a conversation about it. We put together team reports. We do comparison reports. The opportunities are endless with this, and I think it's really important for employers to start focusing on soft skill development in addition to hard skill training.
Thank you. That was really good. Okay, Mandel, tip number 9. Not ensuring the culture of the organization creates and sustains a psychologically healthy workplace environment. So, what do we want to do to make sure we are creating healthy workplace environments?
Everything that Catherine and Maria said.
That's a great answer.
Well, it's not surprising, but there's a lot of overlap with what we're talking about in terms of both how to be more mindful of the demands and the stresses put on us as employers and our employees, our companies, but also being mindful of, our responsibilities, both legally and, as employers, to make sure, we are protected best we can be. And, I love the DISC. I love the soft skills training. I have some contracts with Department of Corrections and with first responders. Now, police, fire, and ambulance. These are not very good soft skill communicators as a rule. And, it varies. I'm not going to say that across the board, but I've been doing training for the Department of Corrections for probably 10 years. And there's a big difference between the older correctional officers and the newer correctional officers. And there's certainly differences in leadership across jurisdictions in our state. And basically, when I went in there and I started doing these trainings, especially with Department of Corrections, I said, this is a cover your ASS training. Because what you really need, because they're prisoners. They have no rights. They can't do this. They can't do that. They're just here to be punished. I'm like, that part is true. However, it's also true that they still have rights, and that if you don't respond to their needs, or you treat them irresponsibly or inappropriately, abusively, you're in trouble. DOC's in trouble. They probably have 150 lawsuits at any given point in time in a 6,000 person incarcerated population in our state. So The American Psychological Association awards psychologically healthy workplace every year to every state. And what it requires is for a company to meet certain requirements to demonstrate that they are mindful of not only the safety and the OSHA requirements that are indicated for work, but culture itself is one of encouragement, tolerance, and acceptance. We have such a diverse workforce these days. So we talked a little bit back when I first became an employer in '91. The main difference was gender and people of color versus people of non-color. Now we have many, many more categories. We have LGBTQs. We have, people of color and ethnicity that goes beyond just black and white. We have, as Catherine talked about before, an increasing number of people with, anxiety and stress-related disorders that get worse when it comes to current circumstances like today. So we have to be incredibly informed about the diversity of not only our communities, but our workforce and our customers, our consumers, because the consumers will sense in whatever business you're in, if you don't have a tolerant and accepting and non-judgmental workforce, whether you're plumbing, electrical, building houses, practicing law, teaching, etc. It's very, very true. And, we need to be mindful that it starts with our organization, that we create a culture of acceptance, tolerance, and respect in communication and conflict resolution. So that spills out into the community and to our client base. I can't emphasize that enough, because it really, for one thing, it's going to give you a good reputation and it's going to get you more business. But second, it's going to avoid things that Catherine and Maria brought up earlier about people claiming that, your organization is discriminating against me because I happen to be trans, and we're all aware now, sometimes you see emails from folks, they have the pronouns that they want to put in behind their names, he, she, or they, or him, he. When I first started seeing that, even as a psychologist, I'm like, well, why is that necessary? I know she's a woman, or I know it's a man. It's a growing thing. It's starting out in probably mostly in my area, but it's going to hit everywhere. It's going to hit everywhere. So that's about it from my end. I did see a question. Somebody asked about, and I know we got one more thing, but maybe Catherine can address this. What if a person doesn't want to get the COVID vaccine because of a religious preference? And because there's a lot of people out there that don't want to get COVID vaccinated, and it could be for religion, or they don't believe in it, or whatever. So maybe at the end.
Yes. We actually have about 4 questions from the audience that once we get this last tip done, I will jump into those. And so the last tip is for Catherine, or from Catherine, and things to avoid is not addressing employees' issues with childcare and sick leave, since the Family Leave Act and Paid Sick Leave Act have technically expired, which was news to me. Catherine, tell us.
Okay, so that, of course, as we know, is a real issue still, the sick leave and the family medical expansion leave, right? It's not going away. And the new law was just passed today. And I have to admit, I've been working since 7:30 in the morning today, and I haven't been able to read the law, and I'm dying to know what actually got put in there about sick leave and family leave. I will say that as of now, my understanding is that it was going to say that those laws have expired, They expired, they sunsetted on December 31st of 2020. However, the deal is that they passed other legislation saying that if you as an employer wish to give those leaves, you are entitled to tax credit for the amount that you pay out. So you have to follow the guidelines under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA, or that isn't legitimate, it isn't valid. Meaning, for instance, you can only give 2 weeks of sick leave to someone. You can't give them 7 weeks and then take tax credits for it. You can give them whatever you want. And I encourage businesses, if they can manage to do it, as far as building loyalty and ensuring continuity of staff and so forth, to give people, and plus, of course, not to get sick, I encourage them to give people these leaves. So they can do whatever they want, but don't try to take tax credit for all of the leave, right? My understanding is the new legislation is also going to provide for that through September. And that means, yes, you can still do it, right? And it's 2/3 pay for certain reasons, including the family leave to take care of your children who cannot go to school or daycare. And then it's full pay if you're caring for yourself. If you're sick, you're quarantining, you get full pay for up to 2 weeks. Same with, I should say 2 weeks. There's a way, in fact, you can get paid 2/3 for 12 whole weeks, not just 10 weeks. But see your lawyer about that one. That's a little more complex. And yes, I am happy to address the question about vaccines. I keep getting that question, as a matter of fact. And I read a really interesting article yesterday on this. So there, of course, are the people who have religious beliefs which prohibit them from taking shots. Now, let's add on to that. And those are people who don't take ever any shots, right? Let's add on to that, which I read yesterday, that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was developed from fetal cells taken from an aborted baby. That has caused a stir among some Catholics. And there have been interestingly, different statements from different people in high-ranking positions in the church about whether a Catholic should take the shot. So now we're on a different basis. It's not that I never take any shots. It's I don't want to take a shot because of the sourcing of the material used in the shot. I couldn't believe this. I thought, wow, are you kidding? I mean, just it never, my job, never a dull moment, right? There's always an excuse for something. There's always a reason for an exception, etc. So the long and short of it is, though, that the person can get an exception to the requirement to get a vaccine if they have a sincerely held religious belief against getting a vaccine. It could be for any of those reasons I just mentioned. But if it's too burdensome for the employer to comply with that, then the employer does not have to give an exception, and the employer can mandate that everyone get vaccines or take an adverse employment action. It won't be considered discriminatory. With religious stuff, it's kind of tread carefully. It's don't ask, the guidance is don't ask for too much detail and sort of documentation and backup. Oh, you're not really a Christian Scientist, right? You're not really an evangelical, whatever, right? Don't go there. The EEOC says you can ask for some kind of, written affirmation, but it doesn't have to be from someone's minister, pastor, or so forth. People have religious beliefs that they don't have to explain to other people. That's part of our freedom of religion in this country. Our right to practice what we think is appropriate as individuals, and we don't have to explain it. But it is not as hard to preclude someone from getting the religious exemption as it is to preclude someone from getting an exemption because of their disability. If someone comes and asks for an exemption because they have a medical reason they can't take one of the vaccines, then you have to go through the reasonable accommodation process. You have to talk to them about that. Whereas religious, you do not. If it's more than a minimal business problem for you that the person won't get vaccinated, then again, you can let them go. You can cut back their hours. You can do what you need to do. You can reassign them to a position where they're not seeing people, force them to work at home all the time. Whatever you need to do until you feel that it's safe to allow people who aren't vaccinated back into your workplace.
Okay, great. So, Catherine, I have one more quick question for you, and then I have two quick ones for Maria, and then I think we'll finally wrap up. We're running a little bit over. And the question, Catherine, is if you have an office in Wilmington and have been withholding city tax, but your employees are now at home in Newark, can they apply for the city tax refund?
Yes, and I'm doing that myself. Absolutely. It's not fun, though. Keep in mind, they have to get a letter from the employer saying, yes, they're employed here, and no, they weren't here. And these are the dates they weren't here. Yeah, it's a little bit elaborate, but I work home and away from home. I work at home and out of state enough that I have always done this. So I do know, I am familiar, and yes, they can apply for a refund. Yep.
Okay. And then Maria, I have two questions for you. One is, when you were talking about the mandatory training for the sexual harassment, the question was, do you have to hand out the notice if your company is small enough that you don't do the interactive training?
No, you do not have to hand them out recurring. That's just a one and done type of thing. Right when they come on board as a new employee, and if right when the law was passed, distributing that notice.
Okay. And then the other question for you is, what tool do you use for the DISC assessment?
Yes, I use a tool called TTI, Targeted Training International. And they're like I said, they're great because they talk about motivators and driving forces in addition to the DISC behaviors.
Great. Well, panel, you have been fabulous today. This has just been great information. For anybody who was having a little bit of technical difficulty or couldn't take notes fast enough, this program was recorded. It will be available up on the Delaware Business Times website, probably by the end of today or tomorrow. And if you want to make sure you're getting notices of future programs that we're doing, we do have 3 more planned for the rest of the year. Make sure you either subscribe to Delaware Business Times or have a relationship with the Small Business Development Center. We send out notices periodically. And I'm thinking that Delaware Business Times will probably come back to Catherine and ask her to write a short article about the new Family Leave Act so we can catch up with the latest information on that. So again, I just really want to thank all the panelists. You've been great. I've really enjoyed working with you. I also want to thank our sponsors again, BNY Mellon, Artisans Bank, Comcast Business, Harvey Hanna and Associates, and the Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce. And I want to bring back Mike Reith, a publisher for Delaware Business Times. He has a few parting words. And I'm going to sign off and see you next time. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, Margot, and thank you once again to everyone for participating in today's presentation. Again, one more time, our sponsors, Artisans Bank, BNY Mellon, Comcast Business, Harvey Hanna Associates, and the Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce. Their support is greatly appreciated, and together with our friends at the SBDC makes these presentations possible. Our networking area will remain open until 1:30, so take advantage of that if you have a few more moments to connect with other attendees today. On behalf of everyone at Delaware Business Times and the Small Business Development Center, enjoy this beautiful day and this beautiful weather and have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.